Imagine a room. But this is not the chamber we have visited before, with its rack glistening under the torchlight, its brazier of hot coals radiating a malevolent heat, or its stone walls stained with the dark patina of past suffering. This room is different. It is small, featureless, and disturbingly clean. There may be a simple stool, a table, and a chair. The walls are bare. The air is still. There is no overt instrument of pain in sight. The man who sits across from you is not a hooded executioner with brutish hands. He is calm, well-spoken, perhaps even scholarly in his demeanor. He offers you a cup of water, a small gesture of humanity that feels both comforting and deeply threatening. He asks about your family, using their names, speaking of them with a casual familiarity that chills you to the bone. He speaks in a reasonable, measured tone, the voice of a doctor discussing a diagnosis. And yet, you are more afraid than you have ever been in your life, because this room, in its sterile, calculated emptiness, is a more sophisticated and perhaps more terrifying torture chamber than any medieval dungeon. The tools being used against you are not iron and rope, but words, silence, light, darkness, and time. The part of you being systematically dismantled is not your body, but your mind, your sense of self, your perception of reality itself. You have been kept in absolute darkness for days, until the very concept of light became a distant memory. Now you are in this room, bathed in a white, unceasing, shadowless light that feels like a physical assault on your eyes. Or perhaps you have been subjected to a constant, maddening noise, a dripping tap, a high-pitched whine, or a low, resonant hum that vibrates through your bones, until the profound silence of this room feels like a physical blow, a deafening roar. The man across from you, your interrogator, your tormentor, your only human contact, tells you that your friends have already confessed. He slides a document across the table, a signed statement detailing your alleged crimes. The signature looks like your friend's. Is it real? Is it a clever forgery? After days of isolation and sleeplessness, your critical faculties are failing. You no longer know. He tells you that cooperation is your only path back to the world you knew, a world that is beginning to feel like a distant, half-remembered dream. He is not shouting. He is not threatening. He is simply, patiently, deconstructing your world, brick by brick, and offering to build you a new one, a new reality in which the only logical, sane, and even desirable thing to do is confess. This is the art and the science of psychological torture. It is a form of violence that leaves no visible scars, but can inflict wounds far deeper and more lasting than any physical torment. It is the cold, calculated understanding that the human mind, for all its astonishing resilience, has architectural flaws, has breaking points, and that these can be found, targeted, and exploited. Long before modern psychology gave us terms like sensory deprivation, learned helplessness, or cognitive dissonance, ancient jailers and medieval inquisitors intuitively understood these principles. They knew that the most effective way to break a prisoner was not always to break their bones, but to shatter their will, to isolate them from their own identity, and to turn their own mind into their worst enemy, a prison from which there is no escape. Welcome to torture history. Today, we close the heavy oaken door on the physical horrors of the dungeon and enter a far more unsettling space, the prison of the mind. We will explore the dark, winding history of mental manipulation, a subtle and insidious form of cruelty that has been a constant companion to physical torture throughout the ages. We will see how institutions like the Inquisition became masters of not just bodily pain, but of soul-crushing despair. And we will journey through the ideological battlegrounds of the 20th century to see how these ancient, intuitive techniques were refined, systematized, and weaponized by modern states into a terrifying science of mind control. This is the story of how to unmake a person from the inside out. So, take a deep breath, find a point of focus in the darkness, and let's explore the architecture of a broken mind. To truly understand psychological torture, we must first understand what it is attacking. It is not attacking your flesh and bone. It is attacking yourself. What is the self? It is a complex and surprisingly fragile construction. The self is not a solid, monolithic entity. It is a story we tell ourselves, a narrative woven from the threads of our memories, our beliefs, our values, our relationships with others, our sense of place in the world, and our perception of the steady, linear flow of time. We take these things for granted. We assume the ground beneath our feet is solid, that yesterday happened in a predictable way, that our loved ones exist and feel a certain way about us. Psychological torture works by systematically attacking and destabilizing every one of these pillars until the entire structure of the self, of who you are, begins to wobble, crack, and finally collapse into rubble. The first, the most fundamental, and the most powerful of these techniques is isolation. Humans are profoundly social creatures. Our sense of identity, our very sanity, is shaped, reinforced, and validated by our interactions with others. To be completely isolated is not just to be lonely. It is to be untethered from reality, cast adrift in the featureless ocean of your own consciousness. Imagine being placed in solitary confinement. In a medieval dungeon, this often meant a cell called an oubliette from the French oublier. To forget, it was literally a place of forgetting, where you would be forgotten by the world and eventually by yourself. You might be lowered into a pitch-black, bottle-shaped pit so narrow you could not sit down, forced to stand in your own filth and the damp, cold darkness for days, weeks, even months. In this state of total sensory deprivation, the mind, starved of external stimuli, begins to turn on itself. It begins to eat itself. With no light, no sound, no human contact, the brain, a machine built to process information, starts to generate its own. You start to hear voices whispering in the suffocating darkness. You see fleeting, phantasmagoric shapes in the gloom. The boundary between your internal world and the external world dissolves. Time, that great anchor of consciousness, loses all meaning. Is it day or night? Have you been here for a week or a year? The distinction becomes meaningless. Your sense of self, which is so dependent on a stable timeline of past, present, and future, begins to fray and unravel like an old rope. In this profoundly vulnerable, regressed state, the interrogator has immense, almost absolute power. After days of this nothingness, the simple act of a human voice, the appearance of a flickering torchlight, the offering of a piece of stale bread, becomes an event of overwhelming, earth-shattering significance. The interrogator becomes your only link to reality, your only source of human contact, your only proof that the world outside your own head still exists. He becomes a godlike figure who controls your entire universe. This creates a powerful, pathological dependency. You begin to crave his approval, to fear his disapproval. Your survival, not just physical but psychological, seems to depend entirely on pleasing him. This dynamic, known in modern psychology as traumatic bonding or Stockholm Syndrome, is one of the most powerful and insidious tools of mental manipulation. The masters of the medieval Inquisition were experts at this long before it had a name. They understood that the journey to the torture chamber began not when the prisoner was strapped to the rack, but at the moment of their arrest. A person would often be seized in the middle of the night, dragged from their bed without explanation by the faceless familiars of the Holy Office, and taken to its secret prisons. They would not be told the specific charges against them. They would not be told who had accused them. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy. The prisoner, plunged into a vortex of uncertainty and fear, would be left to stew in their own anxiety. Their mind would race, frantically trying to guess the crime and the accuser. Was it because I said the local priest was greedy? Was it my neighbor, with whom I had that bitter dispute over a piece of land? Did someone overhear me questioning the reality of a particular miracle? The prisoner's own imagination, fueled by fear and guilt over 100 minor transgressions, had already begun the process of interrogation, had already done half the inquisitor's work for him. The Inquisition's stated goal was not just a confession. It was repentance. They wanted to save the heretic's soul from the eternal fires of hell. And to do that, they believed they needed to break down the heretic's false, prideful beliefs and rebuild them in the image of church orthodoxy. This was a process of psychological demolition and reconstruction, and they had a formal, step-by-step methodology. Let us walk through this process as a suspected Cathar heretic in 13th century France might have experienced it. After your nighttime arrest and your initial period of isolation in a dark, cold cell, you are brought before the Inquisitor. He is not a monster. He is an educated, articulate man, a Dominican friar, a trained theologian. He addresses you not with anger, but with a kind of sorrowful disappointment, the tone a loving father might use with a wayward, foolish child. This is the classic good cop role, designed to disarm you and establish a relationship of paternal authority. He explains that the Church, your holy mother, yearns for your return to her loving embrace. He speaks with vivid, terrifying detail of the joys of heaven and the eternal, fiery torments of hell. He is not just an interrogator. He is your spiritual guide, and the fate of your immortal soul is in his hands. He will give you a time of grace, a period of days or weeks to search your conscience and confess all your sins freely and completely. If you do so, he promises you might receive a lighter penance, a humiliating but non-lethal pilgrimage, a public flogging, or being forced to wear 2 yellow crosses sewn onto your clothes for the rest of your life, a mark of shame known as the pena confusabilis. But this offer of grace is a psychological trap. You don't know what they know. The Inquisition's proceedings were secret, and the accused had no right to know the identity of their accusers. Do you confess to a minor heretical thought you once entertained, hoping that will satisfy them? If you do, have you just confirmed their suspicions and given them the lever they need to pry open your entire life? If you don't confess to it, and they have a witness who reported it, you will be branded a liar and an obstinate heretic, worthy of the harshest punishment. It's a psychological catch-22, a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario that induces immense paranoia and anxiety. If you continue to deny any wrongdoing, the next stage of mental manipulation begins. The Inquisitor will begin to present vague, unverifiable evidence. He will tell you, "We have unimpeachable witnesses who saw you attend a heretical meeting in the woods." He will not name the witnesses. This is crucial. Your mind will race through every person you know. Was it your neighbor? Was it your own friend, who was arrested last month and perhaps confessed under torture, naming names to save himself? The Inquisition system created a society of informers, turning communities against themselves, poisoning the well of social trust. The uncertainty and suspicion were corrosive, isolating you not just physically, but socially, cutting you off even from your own fond memories of your relationships. Then comes the classic technique of deception, the false friend. Another prisoner might be placed in your cell. He, too, seems to be a victim of the Inquisition's injustice. He bemoans his fate, he curses the Inquisitors, he shares his meager rations with you. Slowly, over days or weeks, he earns your trust. You confide in him. You whisper your secrets, your fears, your heretical doubts. He is, of course, a spy, a mouchard, a plant, reporting everything you say back to the authorities. The betrayal of this manufactured trust, when it is revealed, is a devastating psychological blow. It shatters your ability to trust your own judgment of character, making you feel foolish and utterly alone. If all of this fails to produce a confession, the Inquisitor will make the terrible visit. You will be taken on a formal, guided tour of the torture chamber. This is not for the immediate application of torture, but for its cold, clinical demonstration. The executioner will be there, no longer a figure of menace, but a calm technician explaining his tools. He will show you the rack, and perhaps stretch a rope until it groans with tension, demonstrating its power. He will point out the strappado, and explain with anatomical precision how it will dislocate your shoulders. He will show you the funnels and cloths for the water cure, describing the sensation of drowning. This is a purely psychological assault. The goal is to make the threat of pain so vivid, so detailed, so terrifying, that your own imagination inflicts the torture on you before your body ever feels it. For many, this was the breaking point. The mind, unable to bear the agonizing anticipation of the agony to come, would collapse, and a confession, true or false, would pour forth. The true diabolical genius of the Inquisition's method of psychological torture was its benevolent framing. It was all done under the guise of mercy and salvation. Every turn of the screw, both literal and metaphorical, was presented as an act of tough love, a painful but necessary surgery to save your immortal soul from eternal damnation. This created a profound state of cognitive dissonance in the prisoner. The very people inflicting this unimaginable suffering claimed to be doing it for your own good. To resist them was not just to defy an earthly power. It was to defy God himself, to choose eternal hellfire out of stubborn pride. This spiritual weight was often heavier than any physical chains. The prisoner was systematically manipulated into feeling not just afraid, but deeply guilty. Their suffering was presented as their own fault, a direct consequence of their own sinful obstinacy. This internalization of guilt, this collaboration of the victim in their own suffering, is a hallmark of successful, deep mental manipulation. But the history of psychological torture is not confined to the medieval period. The 20th century, with its totalitarian ideologies, its world wars, and its advances in the science of the mind, saw these ancient, intuitive techniques refined into a terrifyingly systematic science. The goal was no longer just a confession for a specific crime, but the complete ideological conversion of the prisoner, what came to be known by the chillingly evocative term, brainwashing. The term itself was a translation of a Chinese phrase, xineo, and was popularized by the journalist Edward Hunter in the 1950s to describe the methods used by Mao Zedong's regime on its own citizens and later on UN prisoners of war during the Korean War. But the techniques had their modern roots in the infamous show trials of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. Western observers were baffled and horrified. How did Joseph Stalin's regime get old, hardened Bolshevik revolutionaries, men who had faced czarist prisons and civil war, to stand up in open court and confess to absurd, impossible crimes of treason and sabotage? The truth, as we now understand it from the accounts of survivors like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and the analysis of historians, was far more insidious than simple physical abuse. It was a systematic process of psychological annihilation, developed and perfected by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD. The process, which later became a blueprint for other totalitarian regimes, can be broken down into three classic stages: breaking down, indoctrination, and rebuilding a new, compliant self. The breaking down process began, as always, with isolation, but it was combined with induced exhaustion and chronic debility. A prisoner would be subjected to endless marathon interrogation sessions, often lasting for days without a break. The primary weapon here was sleep deprivation. After just 48 to 72 hours without sleep, a person's ability to think critically, to concentrate, and to maintain their emotional composure completely collapses. The world takes on a hallucinatory, dreamlike quality. The prisoner becomes highly suggestible, emotionally volatile, and desperate for the ordeal to end. They would be forced to stand for hours, or to sit on a stool in a painful, unchanging position until their muscles screamed in protest. Their diet would be purposefully poor and nutritionally deficient, weakening them physically and making them more susceptible to illness and despair. This carefully calibrated combination of sleeplessness, physical stress, and poor nutrition created a state that psychologists call DDD, debility, dependency, and dread. The prisoner became physically and emotionally dependent on their interrogator, who was the sole arbiter of whether they could sleep, eat, rest, or even use the toilet. Then came the systematic assault on their identity. The interrogator would relentlessly attack the prisoner's past, their beliefs, their entire life's work. A dedicated communist who had devoted his life to the revolution would be told, day after day, that his entire career was based on a lie, that he was an unwitting tool of foreign powers, that his actions had objectively harmed the party he loved. They would be forced to write endless, minutely detailed autobiographies, which the interrogators would then pick apart, finding contradictions, highlighting selfish motives, and maliciously reframing their entire life as a history of failure, deceit, and betrayal. This is a powerful technique of milieu control, where the interrogator completely controls the prisoner's environment and all the information they receive, systematically defining what is real and what is not. After weeks or months of this relentless psychological grinding, the prisoner's old identity would be shattered. They would be filled with a profound sense of confusion, guilt, and existential despair. They would no longer know what to believe about the world or about themselves. This is the point of psychological surrender, the moment the old self dies. Now, the second stage, indoctrination, could begin. The interrogator, who had been the source of all their pain, would subtly change his role. He would become a guide, a confessor, offering a path to redemption, a way out of the fog of guilt. He would offer a new narrative, a new, simplified truth. This new truth was the state-sanctioned version of events. Yes, you are a traitor, but you did not realize it. You were led astray by your own bourgeois pride. But now you have a chance to perform one last great service to the party. By publicly confessing, you can expose the vast conspiracy and help protect the glorious revolution from its enemies. This new narrative offered the prisoner a way to make sense of their suffering and to regain a sense of purpose, even if it was a perverse and false one. The confession became an act of self-sacrifice, a final, noble gesture for the cause. Finally, in the rebuilding stage, the prisoner would actively collaborate with the interrogator to craft their public confession. They would rehearse it, memorize it, learn their lines like an actor preparing for a role. By the time they walked into the courtroom, hollow-eyed and docile, they were no longer simply reciting words. They had, on some deep, fundamental level, come to believe them. Their old self had been destroyed, and a new self, a persona whose reality was aligned with the state's reality, had been built in its place. The men who confessed at the Moscow show trials were not just broken bodies. They were broken minds, men who had been so thoroughly unmade that they willingly, even eagerly, collaborated in their own public and private destruction. These techniques were studied and refined by intelligence agencies around the world during the ideological crucible of the Cold War. In the 1950s, the CIA became obsessed, even paranoid, about the concept of brainwashing, fearing that the Soviets had discovered a mind control drug or a secret technique that could turn American soldiers into communist puppets. This fear led to one of the darkest and most sordid chapters in the history of American intelligence, the MKUltra program. MKUltra was a top-secret and profoundly illegal research program into behavioral modification and mind control. The CIA, operating with a secret budget and minimal oversight, funded research at over 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, and prisons. Much of this research was conducted on unwitting American and Canadian citizens. They experimented with hypnosis, subliminal messaging, sensory deprivation, and, most notoriously, the covert administration of psychoactive drugs like LSD to unsuspecting subjects. The goal was brutally simple: to see if they could break down a person's mind and program a new personality into it. One of the most extreme and horrific subprojects took place under the direction of the Scottish-born psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University in Montreal. Cameron developed a technique he called psychic driving. He would subject patients, often people who had been admitted for relatively minor psychological issues like anxiety or postpartum depression, to a terrifying regimen of what he called de-patterning. They would be put into a chemically induced coma for weeks, even months at a time. They would be subjected to massive, repeated rounds of electroshock therapy, 30 to 40 times the accepted therapeutic level. And while in this vulnerable, regressed state, they would be forced to listen to a looped audio message, played for hours and hours on end, sometimes for up to 16 hours a day, through headphones or a speaker placed under their pillow. These tapes would contain simple negative statements about their supposed failings, followed by positive, corrective statements. This was a literal attempt to erase their existing personality and imprint a new one. The results were catastrophic. Cameron did not create programmable assassins or compliant agents. He created destroyed human beings. His patients suffered from permanent, devastating amnesia, losing all memory of their families, their careers, and their own identities. Many regressed to an infantile state, becoming incontinent and unable to speak. They were left permanently unable to function for the rest of their lives. MKUltra was a brutal, monstrous failure, a testament to the fact that while a mind can be broken and shattered, it cannot be reliably controlled or reprogrammed like a machine. It is too complex, too chaotic, too human. But the program revealed the terrifying willingness of a modern, democratic state to embrace the darkest arts of psychological torture in the name of national security. The legacy of these programs, of this collected knowledge of how to break a mind, echoed loudly into the 21st century, in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks and the subsequent War on Terror. Faced with a new, non-state enemy, the United States government authorized a set of enhanced interrogation techniques to be used on high-value detainees captured in Afghanistan, Iraq, and at secret black sites around the world. While techniques like waterboarding received the most media attention, the core of the program was profoundly psychological. It was based on a theory of learned helplessness, derived from controversial experiments on dogs conducted by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s. The idea was that if you subject a creature to an unpredictable and uncontrollable series of punishments, it will eventually give up all resistance and sink into a state of passive compliance. Detainees were subjected to a systematic regimen of mental manipulation designed to induce this state. They were held in prolonged, extreme isolation. They were subjected to long-term sleep deprivation, sometimes being kept awake for over a week at a time through the use of shackles and constant noise. They were exposed to constant, loud music or white noise, 24 hours a day. Their cells would be kept either freezing cold or oppressively hot. They were placed in agonizing stress positions, designed to be painful and humiliating over long periods. They were subjected to dietary manipulation and forced nudity. Their sense of time, space, and self was deliberately and systematically broken down. The stated goal was to gain actionable intelligence to prevent future attacks. But the results, as detailed in the Senate Intelligence Committee's own report, were highly controversial and, according to a vast number of intelligence and interrogation professionals, deeply unreliable. A person subjected to this level of duress is not a reliable source of information. They are in a state of profound psychological distress, their cognitive functions severely impaired. They will often say anything they think their captor wants to hear, just to make the suffering stop. They will fabricate stories, invent plots, and implicate innocent people. The intelligence gained is tainted at its source by the very methods used to extract it. Furthermore, the psychological damage inflicted by these techniques is immense and long-lasting. Victims often suffer from severe, chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, debilitating depression, crippling anxiety disorders, and a permanent inability to trust others. Their sense of self, the very thing that was targeted, can be permanently scarred. They may have survived the ordeal physically, but they are left to live in the ruins of their own minds, forever haunted by the experience. This is the ultimate, insidious nature of psychological torture. It is a form of violence that does not end when the prisoner is released from their cell. The dungeon is not a physical place. It is a state of mind that the victim is forced to carry with them, a ghost that follows them for the rest of their life. The interrogator's voice can echo in their head for years. The feeling of helplessness, shame, and despair can become a permanent part of their being. When we look back at the long, dark history of mental manipulation, from the subtle theological traps of the Inquisition to the systematic deconstruction of the Soviet show trials and the scientifically informed techniques of the War on Terror, we see a disturbing and unbroken continuity. The tools may change, from a copy of the Gospels to an electrode to a playlist of Metallica, but the fundamental principle remains the same. The target is the human soul, the human psyche, the very essence of what makes a person who they are. It is a form of torture that is easy for perpetrators to deny and for the public to ignore. There are no X-rays of a broken will. There are no photographs of a shattered sense of reality. But its effects are just as real, just as crippling, and just as devastating as any physical wound. It is a profound reminder that the human mind is both a fortress of incredible resilience and a fragile, delicate ecosystem, vulnerable to calculated attack. And it forces us to confront a difficult and enduring question. In our desperate quest for truth or security, How do we ensure that we do not destroy the very thing we are trying to understand or protect, the human mind itself? The history of psychological torture is a long and dark testament to the fact that you can force a person to say anything, but you can never truly know if it is the truth, especially when you have already destroyed the mind that holds it. Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey into the prison of the mind. The history of mental manipulation lacks the visceral, bloody drama of the rack or the stake, but it is in many ways more chilling, because it reveals the hidden vulnerabilities we all share as thinking, feeling beings. If you found this deep exploration of psychological torture and its long history compelling, please support our channel by liking this video and subscribing to Torture History. Click the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the shadows of the human experience. We want to hear from you in the comments below. Which do you believe is ultimately more cruel or more effective as a tool of control? Physical pain or mental manipulation? Is there a clear line between the two, or are they always inevitably intertwined? Your insights and discussions are vital as we continue to explore these complex and important topics. Until next time, remember that the strongest walls are not made of stone, but of a sound and sovereign mind.